And it works not just for startups, but also works for corporate spin-offs. In general, there are about 3 different types of incubators. I mean, we've all seen plenty of the examples of the real estate model. You know, that's where a developer goes and puts up a building and says, come and live here because it's a high-tech park and you can be among other high-tech clients. You've got the venture capital models where the VC firm will want to keep some of their startups close, so they keep an eye on them. Corporates sometimes have incubators. In the not-for-profit sphere, there's the typical council incubators. There's about 80 of them around Australia, and then there's other models in that also. But the thing that's really interesting to us is what is called the hybrid model, and that's really a technology business incubator. That's a lot harder than the first two because it's a more costly initiative to set up. There's a focus on the technology, on the lab space, on the supporting equipment. There's also a lot of emphasis on the network orchestration. So you need a company like a VCAMM or another network facilitator to actually be working with the businesses in the incubator to bring in all the additional services. And I'm going to go through an example in a minute of one from overseas that actually does this sort of thing, just so you can see what it looks like. All incubators have challenges, and we've seen the same with our Knox facility up in eastern Melbourne. How do you operate? It isn't just setting up the building. What is the actual process that you go through? How do you manage the expectations of a whole variety of different stakeholders? And most importantly, how do you manage through the valley of death? Just to explain briefly what that is, every new enterprise, there's usually small amounts of money available to actually seed the opportunity. And once you have a proven viable business case and the risk has been taken out of the venture, you'll find that there's commercial capital available to support it. The problem is the area in between, and that's where there's a graveyard of new businesses. Incubators are supporting businesses in this area, so the finance model is critically important to making any sort of incubation thing work. So for VCAMM, what do we do? What are the key success factors? What are some good benchmarks we can look at? And what might that look like in a Geelong setting? What we found looking around the world, there's a whole variety of different incubator models. There's from Europe and the US and Israel. What we found is that the successful ones tend to have 3 very common characteristics. They have the precinct, they've got the physical facility, and it's a focus on the right precinct, the right facility to get the right mix of client businesses in there, so they can get the most value out of the sharing of experiences and leveraging the network that they have in common. It has the facilitation, like I said, you've got a network facilitator there who is making the connections, bringing in the resources, doing the marketing, doing the project management, helping out on a whole variety of fronts. The sort of stuff that VCAMM has been doing for 10 years. And critically, you have an integrated financial model. So you have a fund that works with the incubator that actually puts money into the businesses through this critical stage of their development. What I'm going to do now is just show briefly some slides from another organisation that we're using it as a benchmark, just to give you an example of what it looks like after 10 years. And that organisation is in Sweden. It's called Chalmers Innovation, and it's an incubator that works in the city of Gothenburg, which is on the south coast of Sweden. Just a couple of points. Gothenburg is about 500,000 people. It's a bit bigger than Geelong, but it's still a provincial city, so it's not a bad analogy. Chalmers University is smaller than Deakin, but it does have some pretty impressive numbers when it comes to the research program. One of the things about Chalmers is they've actually taken the view that they, being a university that's intimately associated with a provincial town, their prosperity is linked to the prosperity of the town. So while they like every university in the world, every research institution in the world, They love to get cash-rich industrials coming and spending money with them to do research programs. They do that just as much as anyone else. They've also recognised that they have a role to play in supporting the commercialisation of IP to generate new business in the town. It'll work for them. It's a longer-term strategy, but it works for them on a business sense and, of course, on a public good sense as well. So they set up Chalmers Innovation in '99, and in the first 10 years of operation, they've got 95 companies, and of which about 70% are still in operation. Now over time, some of those will ultimately fail, but over the long term, they will still have a greater than 50% success rate, which is outstanding compared to the startup survival rate outside an incubator. There's a graph just showing some of the growth over the years in terms of the number of companies, employees. 400 employees, that's a big rate. Times 5 in the service jobs, there's 2,000 jobs. The deal flow. Now, this is their deal flow. There are different incubators elsewhere just as successful. They get their deals from corporates and less from the academic. That doesn't really matter. What matters is you have a program that recognises where the opportunities are coming from and is geared around providing the right supports to them. Don't need to remember these names, but this just gives you an idea of the staff for a technology incubator. Now, if you look at a real estate incubator that we typically see, or a council incubator, you've got 1 or 2 staff, one of which is the receptionist. They have to do that to keep the costs down. To make this work, you actually need to at least have an association with an organisation that you can have the staff available to support these businesses. And then, of course, as I was saying, you've got the integrated financial model. For Chalmers, they've got their own fund, which the incubator manages. So the staff of the incubator manage the fund. They put in staged funding in line with the growth in maturity of the new businesses. Relatively small amounts. Just the conversion rate from Swedish krona to the dollar is about 7 to 1. So that might be $50,000 to $100,000, going to $250,000 to $750,000, up to $2 to $3 million. What they're doing all the way along, and in an increasing scale, is bringing in partner funding. These guys will put money in because the risk is being taken out, and because the Chalmers Seed Fund, which is a for-profit venture, is doing a lot of the due diligence and got their own skin in the game. That takes a lot of the risk out for these guys as well. So it's much more of a straightforward business decision rather than a guessing game and trying to see through smoke and mirrors of business plans and the like. So it makes it a lot easier to get the funding, while you still have a disciplined process to manage the risk.